Okay, so we're gonna get started picking up where we left off on the prayer site. So when I come to open Dreamweaver, it shows me I can open recent items. There's a bunch of different index.html files. I'm not exactly sure which one is mine. It's probably this one, but I'll click open. I will go to Paris 2 because that's the site we worked on, and I'm gonna open up index. I'm gonna click open, and that will bring up our site. Now, the most important thing is that we once again check that we have the right Paris site here linked in. And in this case, it's Paris 2 that I needed. It looks like this is Dreamweaver CS6, so I may have opened it last in CC or something. So I'm going to open that up a little bit so you guys can see it. And close that over here. So let's zoom out. And we can kind of see our site. So now it's time to actually start putting in content and styling that a little bit. So if we remember, if we pull up our other site that we did previous to this, Paris, and we open up this, we can see that we had already added a little bit of content here with some interactivity that worked. But we're going to redo that on this side so that you can see it kind of in the video and kind of follow it at your own pace. So in addition to opening up our site, I'm going to open up the mockup. So I'm going to go to my templates and I'm going to find mockup stage 2. And I'm going to open that in InDesign so that I can refer back to that about sizes and things like that. So I'm going to minimize those. Come back here. Wait for that to open so that we can compare sizes. Now, one thing we can do while we're here is delete everything that's inside this content div, because everything that's in here, we don't need this instructions, this how to use this document, logo replacement. None of that. All of that's just auxiliary stuff. So if I highlight all of that, I can see kind of where it is here. In this case, I want to also grab the heading tag that's around it and come all the way down to the P tag where it closes at the section tag there. So if I highlight all that, I can look back over here and make sure I've highlighted all the correct stuff. That's kind of the hard part, is sort of seeing where the code starts and ends. I'm going to hit delete. And then when I click into here, it will refresh. And I will now have what looks like a pretty empty site. I have one little sort of rectangular div right here that should contain all my content, and that's where I'm going to start adding everything. So it's called article class content, or it may be called div class content if you use one of the older formats. Article classes come in with HTML5, so that's a kind of a new thing. Pretty similar. We won't worry too much about defining those, but if I come over now to my InDesign file, I can look back at all of the things I need to make, and I can start building that content. So the first thing I want to check is the size of this box, because I have 3 sections, and I'm going to make them into 3 different boxes. So if I grab this, I can see that it's 1,000 pixels wide by 500 pixels high. So that's what I need to make. So I need to start making these divs here at different sizes. So let's come back to Dreamweaver, and let's add in a div. So the way we add a div, or essentially really just a box that holds content, divs are kind of the boxes that contain everything, is we go to Insert, and then it should be Layout Objects, Div Tag. If you're in CS6, if you just go Insert, Div Tag will be one of the first things you see up there. But in CC, you'll see it up here. CS6, it's down here in Layout Objects. So you'll see there's 2 types of div. There's a div tag, and there's an AP div, and then there's a fluid grid layout div tag. Don't worry about this one, and don't worry about this one. An AP div is, as I said earlier, an absolutely positioned div. It means that it will like float above everything and kind of it'll stay exactly where you put it, which is not good for the purpose of this layout. We want it to move with everything else. So I'm going to insert a div tag. Now, when I insert a div tag, I'll get a dialog box that comes up, and this is the important thing you need to know is how to insert these divs properly. So the first thing I want to do is give it an ID or a name. So this one will be called welcome content, because it kind of has the little welcomes text there. The next thing I want to do is select a class for it. But I don't have any classes available that do what I want them to do, which define its size and tell it what color to be and all of that. So instead, I'm going to create a new CSS rule, or basically a new class rule. So new CSS rule. You can select either ID applies to only one HTML element, where it says all the rules you write will only apply to welcome, or you can select a class rule. I like to write class rules simply because I can reuse them later and there's no confusion. If something gets renamed or anything gets weird, the class will still follow it. So as long as it says class equals whatever this is, the class will stay connected. But either way, I don't think this will cause a problem for you as long as you don't plan on reusing that class for something else. But we'll do a class rule. So class rule, and I will call this one welcome because it matches the name of the box, so it'll be easy to remember. And then I'm going to click OK. Now, it's going to write that code for that style. It's going to write it in the wrong place, but it will write it there. And now all we have to do is define some of our rules here if we're ready to do that. We can just click OK if we're not ready to define the rules and move forward. But I know a few things I want to do. So the first is I want to go to box, and I want to select my width and my height because I know what height and width I need. So it should be 1000 by 500. The next thing I want to do is actually select the background color because I do know that as well. So if I come to background color, I can see that I can go to System Picker and select colors this way. So there's a lot of different ways to do it there. I can come here and I can expand that and look at color format, all these different things, and I can switch this to 6 decimal hexadecimal code basically. And then I can type in my hexadecimal code from Photoshop. If I don't have my hexadecimal code, then I can use one of those other formats. So you can see that there's a variety of color formats. Let's go back to InDesign and see what color format is applied here. So if this is the colors I want to go with, I know I have an alternate version that has some different colors, but let's just pick these colors here. And I come here, I can see I don't see my hexadecimal format immediately, but I do see my RGB. So if I write those down separately over here on a piece of paper, and I know it's 98, 128, and 171, I can click OK, I can come back to Dreamweaver, and I can switch my color mode, RGB, and I can actually write that content in. So I can actually come over here and rewrite that content to be 98, 128, 171, and then if I click out, it will apply that color, and I can hit OK. Now when that's done, we'll come back to the insert div. It'll say class equals welcome since we just created that. ID equals welcome, that's the name. And then we click OK. And ta-da, there it is. So we can see that we have our first content box ready to go. Now there's a couple things we will want to adjust here. The first is that I want to move this CSS style rule over to my CSS document. For some reason, it kind of wants to write them over there. I'm sure there's a setting I can change. But for now, this is what's going to happen to you. Copy from the pink to the pink there. Copy it. Delete it here. And then you can just come over to your CSS and sort of drop it in at the bottom. It doesn't matter kind of what order these are in for this purpose. We're fine. So you'll notice nothing changed because it's still linked to the CSS. It's just no longer in the head tag. I don't like to have my CSS divided up between this document and this one because it kind of throws things off. But if you remember, we have a little issue here. What is this gray edge that's showing up? Why isn't this butting up to this one up here and the footer down here? The reason is because the div that is containing all of this has some padding applied, so we have to figure out where that is. So if I click this one, actually hovering it over it tells me that it has padding 10. So I've got it clicked. Let's go back to my source code, click it again, and find out what it is. So article class content. It looks like that is kind of what's got this problem. So let's go find that rule under CSS styles. We'll scroll down and find content. So we can do it this way, or we can go into our CSS here, find it there as well. So we can scroll through, look for content. There's content. It's also here. And we can make any adjustments we need to make to it. So properties is a little squeezed. Let's see if we can get that to open up a little. Right there. So we can see padding bottom and padding top at 10 pixels. We see that both here, over here, and if we click the rule and edit the rule, we can see that here as well. So in this case, I'm just going to set the padding to 0, and that will solve our problem. Click OK, and it slices it in. So now it fits nice and snug into that border. So perfect. Going to save it, and let's preview the document. So preview in Firefox since I have that launched. Okay, there we go. So we can see it fits nice and tight. We've got the first box here. Now let's add our other 3 boxes, and then we'll start adding content into them and styling that properly to get it to fit. So once I've done that, exit, come back, go to my source code, and now I just got to find this box and click basically below it. So if I see that I've got div class, welcome, ID, welcome, content for class, welcome ID goes here, and then the end of the div tag, I can just click there in the code. I'm going to hit enter just to open it up. Nothing will happen here. And I'm going to insert another div. So we're going to do the exact same thing again. So layout objects, div tag. This one, I could set it to match class welcome, but I don't want to because I want to use a different color. So I'm actually going to give it a new class. So let's look at this one here. So this would be called probably something like gallery. So let's come back to here. We'll call it ID gallery. We'll write a new CSS rule named gallery. I just switched it to a class rule. We'll click OK, and then we'll add in that content that we need. So box width 1000, height 500, and then background, let's go select our color. So I'm just going to throw a color in there, and then I'm going to go grab the actual color I want. By clicking this, double-clicking the color, and remembering 89, 137, 160. So 89, 137, 160. 89, 137, and then finally 160. So that's how you can get your colors to match. If you're in Photoshop and you have a hexadecimal code, remember you can always come here and change your color format so that you can put in the correct mode for yourself, or the correct color. And oops, I changed it, so now I got to redo it. Accidentally used the eyedropper. So let's go back and check that since I've already forgotten it. 89, 137, 160. So 89, 137, and 160. And then I'm going to click OK. So now we have a new class called gallery, an ID, so a name for the box called gallery, and we click OK, it will insert it, and there we go. So there's our next one. So while we're here, let's insert the final div, and then we'll have our 3 sections. All of our sections will be in, and it'll just be a matter of adding content. So finally, hit enter down here again. Don't hit enter in here. You want to make sure you're doing it in the code so you don't accidentally add extra stuff over here. And now I'm going to, once again, insert layout objects, div tag, and then I can do it this way. But I actually am going to write this by hand just so you can see how I would maybe write this content on my own. So I've shown the easy way to do it for these. Let me do it on my own here. So I can actually just copy this content. So I can hit div, class equals, and then write a class in, even though the class doesn't exist yet. So I'm going to call this one contact, even though I have not written that class rule. Write ID equals contact. Close that tag, so that's the opening tag, and then close the box by hitting that, and it will automatically close the div. So make sure you don't accidentally do that afterwards. It happens sometimes. So now I've actually just written the div in by hand. It will exist there, but it's so small because there's no information telling it how big to be that it's just going to be kind of collapsed. So now I've got to go write the rule contact. So how would I do that? I go to my CSS, scroll to the bottom, and I write the new rule called contact. So dot contact, open curly cues, close curly cues, and that rule is written. So it's actually, many times once you get used to it, it's easier to write the code, it's faster. Now I can actually just copy and paste this right here. So I can copy the background color, height, and width from here, paste it in, and then just change the color as necessary. So I'll come back to InDesign, and I will find out what color this one is. So I'll double click. This one's 125, 195, 245. So 125, and then what was the next one? 125, 195, 245. And then 245. Okay, so you can see I was able to create that div the same exact div, but it was a little different because I actually hand wrote the code. That is personally how I prefer to do things now that I'm really used to working this way. But you can easily do it from the insert tab. I just think it's easier to write the code myself. You'll notice it doesn't have this little text in it in this one. And that's simply because I didn't use Dreamweaver to insert it, so it didn't insert that extra text. Now the first thing I'm kind of noticing here is that my gray text is not really very visible. So we may want to go change that now that I have different background colors. So I can scroll up and I can go try and find the rule in here and look for it that way. It's probably up here at the top where I can see color. And I can also check for it over here because this will give me a good idea. So if I match that color, I go, oh, there it is. and I can set it to white, and that will now make the content white. So there we go. So that is now our 3 boxes. I'm going to save it, and we're going to preview in Firefox. So there we go. So now we have 3 nice sections. We've got our footer, we've got our header, and we're ready to start adding the real stuff now. So this is basically the skeleton for everything that's going to come later, because this is a background image. It's not even an image in this box yet. So once I've done that, I can exit this, I can come back, and it's time to start adding the content as necessary. So what I like to do is actually start with the simplest parts first. So the first thing, based on my layout, the simplest one to fill will probably be this one that just says copyright 2014. That's very easy to add. So I can come right back to Dreamweaver. I can highlight the items in the footer. I can see that I'm in the footer there. Delete. Hit delete. And then I can just write the content in. So I can hit copyright Danielle Feliciano, hit refresh, and now I have the content there. So that is present. It's where I need it to be. The next trick will be to get it to be centered. So where can I do that? Probably the rule for footer. You'll notice when you look at footer that unlike the divs I just created, it doesn't say class footer. It doesn't have that written in here. The reason is because that rule is that different type of rule that we just saw that's a named rule. So the rule applies to it because it has the same name. So it's kind of connected to it in a different way. But that's still pretty easy. So now all I need to do here is change my padding a little bit and center my text. And I'm going to do that this time by going to Edit Rule. Then I can go to Type. I can say, I think actually we want to go to Block. There we go. And go to Text Align Center. If I'm not sure if that worked, I can hit Apply and look down and see. And then finally go to Box, and I want to add some top padding that will push this type down a little bit and see how that helps. So I'll do top, I'll do 40, and I'll hit Apply. That kind of pushes it down. Let's maybe do like 60, Apply, and then I'll click OK. And you'll notice something kind of happened here that we didn't really want to happen. This box got bigger. So our footer just enlarged because we added more size to it by adding the padding. So we can correct that by removing some of the height. So 150 minus 60 equals 90. So there we go. So that dropped our footer down to a more reasonable size. I may take off the bottom padding as well. I'm not sure if I really need that. So I just disabled it. I didn't delete the rule, but I disabled it. So let's add a little more padding. Let's set it to 70. So this is a lot of times what you're going to be doing with padding, just sort of playing with it until you get it to fit right. And maybe I'll drop this down to 80 to match. And now together, the 80 plus the 70 is the actual size of the box. So I'm going to hit Save. Save my CSS by clicking in it and hitting Command S. Go back to Firefox. And we can see, ta-da, that was really quick. We really easily added that little bit of content. I was able to use the padding and stuff like that because I know there's not a lot of other stuff to go in here, so I don't have to make a new div for this text. I can just drop it right in. Now the next thing we want to do is actually style this heading text so that it looks a little bit more, it's a little bigger and kind of matches this one maybe. So Dreamweaver, we'll come back, we'll style this text, and then we will pause this and move on to the next section. So here we go. What we probably want to do is create a heading rule for this. So if you remember, we can come to source code and go to page properties and add heading text there. Go to headings and add a new type of heading. Or we can add them as CSS rules in our CSS. So in this case, I think it'll be easier for me to hand write this code. So I'm going to go to paris.css and I'm going to search for where my headings are so that it's kind of where they need to be. You can put it anywhere you want, but it helps to go find an area where it's related. So I can see I already have 2 headings written from the last time we did this, but I want to change them a little bit. So I want heading 1 instead to not be extra, extra large, to be maybe a little smaller. We'll put it at large, or we'll put it maybe, let's pick a point size. So we'll pick 18. Font weight bold is fine, but for color, we want to switch that. So I know white is FFF, and I can do it that way. Or I can just click here and select my color. So maybe I'll pick CCC, make it a light gray, just so we can see it. Now, once you've written those heading rules, all I have to do is come highlight this text and give it a heading. So I can come here to Format and click Heading 1, and it should grasp onto that heading. So it looks like it didn't really change it very much. So let's check the source code, and it looks like it didn't even grab the heading. So let's go Heading 1. There we go. So now it follows Heading 1. We can see it's a light gray. It's now size 18. Maybe I want the size to be bigger. I can come over here and find my heading rule in this section up here. Heading 1, and I can change the size and see how that looks. So if I change that to 24, maybe that looks a little better. Now I have to come back to my footer rule and change the padding a little bit so that it fits nicer, and then we'll be done. So let's say padding top, we want to drop that back down to 60 maybe. Oh, now 600. 60, let's try 50. And that looks a little better. So then I could add those points back into here to get it to open up. But for now, I think that's fine, actually. The footer can be a little skinnier. So we'll go to Firefox. It says some files need to be accurately or saved in order to accurately preview. Click yes. And then we'll see that now I have a nice footer with the copyright information neatly centered and kind of pushed into the center of this div. So perfect. That is done. Now the next section that we're going to go over is going to be adding more content, including we'll add a table up here for navigation. So let's get out of here. There we go.